Caroline sat alone on the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Inside, the low hum of the dishwasher and the distant giggles of children floated through the open window. The house felt full now, but for many years it hadn't. She traced the rim of her cup with a slow finger, remembering the first time David had said it. "You'll never be alone again." It was a simple promise. Soft, tender, spoken over a plate of sweet potato pie in a booth at Marlin's Cafe, where the two of them had shared their first real date. He'd reached for her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and Caroline, at 62, had dared to believe she might not have to finish life on her own. After so many years of widowhood, loneliness had carved itself deep into her bones. Friends had gone their own ways. Her daughter had passed too soon, and in the stillness that followed, Caroline had learned to live in silence. Then came David. With his pressed shirts and slow smile, his baritone voice, and the way he remembered all her stories without interrupting once. He made her laugh again. He made her feel seen. He made her believe there was still a chapter waiting to be written, even after all she'd lost. They had danced in the kitchen, watched Sunday service together on her tablet, shared little things, like her collard greens recipe, or the way he liked 3 sugars in his coffee. She had let herself hope. She had let herself want, but some promises break faster than hearts. Caroline turned her head toward the sound of footsteps. Ethan and Lily running barefoot on the lawn, their laughter chasing each other like light on water. Her grandchildren were her heartbeat now, the reason she woke every morning with purpose, even through the ache. She smiled faintly. This story isn't about fairy tale endings. It's about what happens when love disappoints you and what you do with the pieces left behind. It's about a woman who chose to rise, even when no one came to lift her. Her name is Caroline, and this is the story of how she found forever, just not the way she expected. At 62, I thought love had finally found me again. Caroline smiled as she stirred her coffee, the spoon clicking gently against the ceramic mug. Marlin's Cafe was nearly empty that afternoon, sunlight pouring through the windows and lighting up the soft golds and browns of the wood-paneled walls. It was a small, unassuming place, tucked between a laundromat and a beauty supply store, but it held warmth. It was the kind of place where folks knew your name and your order. She sat across from David, watching as he read the menu like it was a love letter. He looked up, eyes meeting hers, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Still thinking about that peach cobbler?" he teased. Caroline laughed softly. "You know me too well." It wasn't just the cobbler. It was the comfort of him, the calmness he brought. David had a way of making her feel like time slowed down when they were together. His voice was deep and even, with a rhythm that reminded her of old jazz records and summer nights on her grandmother's porch. He had a proud frame, tall and steady, and wore his years with the kind of grace that came from knowing who he was. Their connection had been quiet at first. 2 older souls finding each other at a community health workshop. They had talked about arthritis, meal prep, and Medicare paperwork. But then, somehow, they'd started talking about music, family, faith. He'd offered to walk her to her car. She hadn't expected to say yes. Now, 3 months later, they met every week at this cafe. And every week, Caroline felt that bloom of hope, soft, hesitant, but real. She tucked a lock of silver hair behind her ear and said, "You know, I almost didn't come that first day." David tilted his head. "Why not?" "I thought, what's the point? At this age, who really finds love?" Her voice caught slightly. "But now I'm glad I did." He reached across the table, his hand warm as it covered hers. "Caroline, it's never too late. Not for love, not for joy. We still have time." His words landed in a part of her that had gone quiet years ago. Caroline had spent so much of her life giving, first to her late husband, then to her daughter, and now to her grandchildren. She'd made peace with the idea that her days of romance were behind her. She had settled into routines, into solitude, into silence. But here was this man, reminding her that she was still a woman, that she still mattered. Their meals arrived, catfish for her, smothered chicken for him, and they bowed their heads briefly in prayer before eating. It was easy being with David. Easy in a way that felt earned, not borrowed. Later, as they stepped outside, the autumn breeze danced around them, carrying the smell of roasted peanuts from the vendor across the street. David walked her to her car, as he always did. "You free next Friday?" he asked. Caroline looked up at him, her smile warm. "I think I could be." As she pulled away and watched him disappear in her rear-view mirror, a thought came uninvited, but not unwelcome. Maybe this was the season when something beautiful could still grow. Even late blooms deserved the sun. Ethan's laughter rang out across the yard, wild and free. "Grandma, you can't catch me," he shouted, darting between the rose bushes and the broken lawn chair she still hadn't gotten around to fixing. Caroline kicked off her sandals and chased after him barefoot, holding her long skirt with one hand and reaching out with the other. Lily squealed with delight from the porch steps, her little hands clapping, curls bouncing as she laughed. "You better run, boy," Caroline called, half laughing, half out of breath. "I still got a little speed left in me." She didn't really, not like she used to. But for a few seconds, it didn't matter. Her lungs burned, her knees protested, but her heart felt light. She finally caught Ethan around the waist and they both tumbled gently onto the grass, breathless and smiling. Lily ran over and collapsed beside them, curling into Caroline's side. It was moments like this, just this, that made it all feel possible. Inside the house, dinner was halfway done. Red beans simmered on the stove, cornbread already cooling on the counter. The table was still scattered with coloring books, math worksheets, and a small mountain of broken crayons. The house was always noisy now, always messy, always full. And yet, for the first time in years, it felt alive. After her daughter passed, Caroline hadn't planned on raising children again. She hadn't planned on sleepless nights, school drop-offs, or calming nightmares at 2 a.m. She hadn't planned on becoming a mother again at 60. But when the call came, the one that told her the kids needed her, there hadn't been a moment of hesitation. She opened her arms. Then she opened her home. Back inside, she helped Lily wash her hands while Ethan set the table, proud of himself for remembering the forks. Dinner was loud. Ethan told a story about a classmate who brought a frog to school. Lily interrupted twice just to say she loved the cornbread. Caroline listened, smiled, nodded, even when her mind wandered. She was thinking about David. He hadn't met the children yet, not properly. He knew she had grandkids. He'd seen the framed photos in her living room, but he didn't know the full story. Not that they lived with her, not that she was their sole guardian, not that the reason she sometimes canceled dates last minute had more to do with a scraped knee or a fever than with feeling tired. She hadn't hidden it. Not exactly. But she hadn't told him either. Not the whole truth. After dinner, she tucked the kids in. Lily with her stuffed elephant, Ethan with his nightlight still flickering from the corner. She kissed their foreheads and lingered for a moment in the doorway, listening to the quiet. Downstairs, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at her phone. She had to tell him. If this was going to become something real, if David truly meant what he said about not wanting to grow old alone, he deserved to know what came with her life. The laughter, the mess, the responsibility, the love. Caroline pressed her lips together. She wasn't ashamed, but she was afraid. Not of judgment, but of being left. Again. Still she whispered to herself, better he knows now than later. Outside, the crickets started up their nighttime song. Caroline glanced at the empty chair across from her and smiled. Soft, unsure, but real. Tomorrow, she'd tell him. David, I need you to know the truth. Caroline's voice trembled just slightly as she laid her napkin across her lap. The glow of candlelight danced on the walls, casting soft shadows in her dining room. She'd set the table for two. Baked chicken, green beans, a sweet potato casserole he always raved about. The children had eaten earlier and were already upstairs, tucked into bed with their favorite bedtime stories. David sat across from her, smiling the way he always did when the food was good and the company better. You didn't have to go all out, he said, reaching for his glass of water. I'm just happy to be here. Caroline tried to smile back, but her chest was tight. There was something about the way he sat so comfortably in the space, the way he called her kitchen cozy, the way he complimented her on the small things, like how the napkins matched the plates, that made this harder. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind, but she knew this moment might change everything. I didn't just make dinner to be sweet, she said gently. David looked up, curious now. Oh? She took a breath, slow and steady. You know I have grandchildren. I've told you about Ethan and Lily. But what I haven't told you is that they live here, with me, full time. David's expression shifted just barely, the twitch of an eyebrow, the soft pause before setting his fork down. Caroline continued. My daughter, Jasmine, she passed 3 years ago. It was sudden, complications during surgery. Their father, he's not in the picture. Hasn't been since Lily was born. So when everything happened, there wasn't a question. They came to me. David leaned back in his chair, no longer smiling. His face wasn't hard, but it was unreadable. I've been raising them since, she said. Day in, day out. I cook their meals, I help with homework, I take them to doctor appointments. This is their home now, and it's my life. It's not easy, but I wouldn't trade it. Silence stretched between them. He rubbed his chin, eyes lowered. I see. She studied him, searching for something. Reassurance, maybe. Compassion. Even confusion would have been better than the sudden, careful distance he seemed to place between them. I didn't want to hide it from you, she said. I just needed to be sure you saw me first, not just the situation. David nodded slowly, avoiding her gaze. That's a lot to take in, Caroline. I know. And you're doing all that alone? Yes. He nodded again. The silence was no longer gentle. It was heavy now. It sat in the room like a third guest at the table. Caroline reached for her water, steadying herself. I care about you, David. I do. But I needed you to know the full picture before this goes any further. He looked up at her then, eyes softer than before, but still distant. You should have told me earlier. I'm telling you now, she said quietly, because it matters. Another long pause. He pushed his plate back just slightly. I think I need some time to think. Caroline nodded. She didn't plead, didn't explain again. She had said what needed to be said. David stood, politely kissed her cheek, and offered a vague, let's talk soon. And just like that, he left. She sat there long after the candles burned low, long after the dishes cooled on the table. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the soft sound of Lily's nightlight humming upstairs. Caroline looked at the empty chair across from her and exhaled slowly. She hadn't asked him to stay, but she had hoped he would. His phone stopped ringing. His chair stayed empty. Caroline sat in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the creaks of the house settle into night. The warmth from the candlelit dinner they'd shared just a week ago had faded. So had David's voice, once steady and reassuring, now absent, like a song she couldn't quite remember the tune to. She had called him twice, not back to back, not desperate, just hoping. Once to say hello, the second time, just to ask how he was. Both times, her call went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. He didn't return either call. A week passed, then 2. The silence grew heavier, as if the house itself knew she had been left again. She didn't speak about it to Ethan or Lily, didn't explain why she sat a little longer at the kitchen table after they went to bed, why she lingered by her phone before turning out the light, why she opened her closet and stared at the soft blue dress she wore the night he said, "You make me feel young again." He had made her feel young too, but now she only felt foolish. Each day folded into the next. School lunches, laundry, a quick stop at the grocery store, bedtime routines. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. Children still needed baths. Bills still came in the mail. Caroline moved through it all, efficient and steady, even as a part of her sagged inward, wounded by the slow unraveling of what could have been. One evening, after she finished washing the dishes, she sat on the couch and looked at his mug on the shelf. It still sat there next to hers, matching plain, both gifts from their third non-date at the church rummage sale. She had picked them out together, laughing at how corny it was. Now it felt like a souvenir from something that never really belonged to her. She reached up, took the mug down, and held it for a moment. Then she set it in the cabinet behind the others, not thrown away, just out of sight. That night, Lily crawled into bed with her. "Grandma," she whispered, her small fingers gripping the hem of Carolyn's sleeve. "Why are you sad?" Carolyn blinked in the dark. She hadn't cried in front of them, hadn't sighed or slumped or raised her voice, but Lily had noticed anyway. Caroline wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered. "Just thinking too much." "Did someone hurt you?" The question sat there raw and direct in the dark. Caroline swallowed. "Some people leave when things get hard. It doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for." Lily didn't say anything after that. She just laid her head on Caroline's shoulder and fell asleep. The next morning, Caroline packed lunches, tied shoelaces, and brushed edges like any other day. But inside, something had shifted. Not shattered, not broken, just changed. It started with glances. In the grocery store, at church, on the sidewalk during school pickup. People didn't always say things out loud, but Caroline had lived long enough to know how to read a silence that lingered too long or a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Sister Hattie, who always used to wave during Sunday service, now gave a polite nod and moved on quickly. And at the checkout line in Harris Market, Caroline caught 2 women whispering just after she turned the corner with her shopping cart. One of them looked away when their eyes met. The other didn't bother. She didn't need to guess what they were talking about. Everyone in the neighborhood had seen David around, holding her hand after church, bringing her flowers from the farmer's market, sitting beside her at the fish fry like he'd always belonged there. And now that he was gone, people noticed that too. There was a certain kind of cruelty in being visible only when something fell apart. One afternoon after school, as they walked home, Ethan kicked a rock down the sidewalk, quiet for most of the way. His backpack hung heavy on his shoulders. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby." He hesitated. "Did Mr. David stop coming because of us?" Caroline's heart clenched so hard it stole her breath. She stopped walking, crouched beside him on the sidewalk, and looked him in the eye. His face was open, honest, not angry, just unsure, as if he needed her to confirm something awful he was already starting to believe. "No," she said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." He looked down at his shoes. "But you told him about us, and then he stopped coming. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Sometimes when people find out what love really requires, they choose not to stay. But that has nothing to do with you or Lily. That's about him. Ethan nodded, but she could see he wasn't convinced. She kissed his forehead and stood up slowly. They walked the rest of the way home in silence. That night, after the kids were asleep, Caroline sat on the porch with her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. Autumn was coming in slow, brushing the wind with cool fingers. She watched the leaves shift in the trees across the street and thought about how quickly things could change. Seasons, people, hopes. She wondered if she had misjudged David, or worse, if she had misjudged herself. Had she been selfish to want love again? To hope for more, after so much life had already passed her by? Caroline had fought hard not to let shame take root in her. She had raised a daughter through hardship, buried her with grace, stepped up when no one else did. But somehow, this quiet rejection, this retreat by someone who claimed to care, felt like proof she should have stayed in her lane. The shame wasn't loud, it whispered. It showed up in the way she hesitated before laughing in public, the way she avoided phone calls from nosy friends, the way she started to second-guess whether she should have told David at all. But even as the doubts crept in, something steadier rose inside her. She had not lied. She had not failed. She had simply told the truth, and someone chose to walk away from it. That wasn't her shame to carry. You are stronger than you think, Caroline. Margaret's voice cut through the evening air like truth always does. Soft, but sharp enough to reach where it needed to. They sat on Margaret's porch, two wicker chairs angled toward the setting sun. A pitcher of iced tea sweated between them untouched. The cicadas were starting up for the night, and kids' voices drifted faintly from yards down the street. Lily and Ethan were inside with Margaret's grandson, playing board games and asking for snacks every 10 minutes. Caroline wrapped her cardigan a little tighter around herself. I don't feel strong, she admitted. I feel tired and stupid, like I should have known better. Margaret gave her a look that only women in their 50s and 60s can give. Equal parts sympathy, and don't start that nonsense. You are not stupid, you're human, she said, reaching for her glass. We all want to be seen, want to be chosen, want someone to stand next to us and say, you're not in this alone. That's not weakness, Caroline, that's hope. Caroline didn't answer right away. She watched the sky shift from gold to lavender, listened to the porch creak beneath their feet. I really thought he was different, she finally said. He saw me, Margaret. At least, I thought he did. He probably did. But seeing someone and being ready for what that means are two different things. Caroline looked over. You ever been through something like this? Margaret chuckled without humor. Honey, I've been through worse. 2 marriages, both left me for younger women. And when I turned 55, I remember standing in the mirror thinking, well, I guess that's that. Caroline raised an eyebrow. You never told me that. Because I didn't want pity, and I figured you already had enough weight on your shoulders. Margaret leaned in. But let me tell you something. Loneliness will lie to you. Make you think you need someone just to be whole again. But you already are. Caroline blinked hard. The tears didn't fall, but they pressed gently against her eyes, waiting for permission. Some days I feel like I'm drowning in responsibilities, she whispered. The bills, the school meetings, the bedtime stories, the grief that still sneaks up when I look at Jasmine's old photos. And now, the embarrassment on top of it. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. I let myself believe someone could choose all of me, not just the easy parts. Margaret reached across and placed her hand over Caroline's. He couldn't choose you, because he hadn't chosen himself. That ain't your failure. That's his fear. They sat like that for a while. Two women weathered but not broken, breathing in the kind of peace that doesn't come easy. The kind that only shows up when someone sees your pain and doesn't flinch. When the porch light finally clicked on, Caroline exhaled. "I think I forgot how to choose myself," she said quietly. "Well," Margaret smiled, "then it's about time you remember." Bills on the table. Silence in the house. Caroline stared at the envelope in her hand, the one from the electric company. She already knew what it said. The bold red letters on the front made it clear enough. Final notice. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Worry had become so routine that even panic had lost its urgency. The kitchen clock ticked past 11:30 p.m. The kids were asleep. The dishes were done. The TV sat off, the room dark except for a small lamp near the refrigerator. Caroline sat at the table with her checkbook open, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from fatigue. There was too much month and not enough money. Again. She'd picked up weekend hours at the church kitchen and started mending clothes for a few neighbors. Every little bit helped, but it wasn't enough. Groceries, field trip forms, new shoes Ethan needed because he was growing faster than her paychecks. She pressed her palm to her forehead. "Lord, I'm doing my best," she whispered, "but I don't know how much more I've got left." The room didn't answer. In the quiet, the sound of her exhaustion grew louder, the aching in her joints, the weight in her chest, the constant ticking of a life held together by sheer will. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and breathed through the tightness. She had raised a daughter, buried that daughter, taken in her grandchildren without hesitation. And still, the world seemed to ask more of her. But what choice did she have? This was love, too. Not the soft kind with flowers and date nights. The kind that showed up in lunch boxes, in late-night Tylenol doses, in saying, "I'm fine when you're not." She heard a soft shuffle behind her. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. "Why are you up?" she asked gently. "I had a bad dream," he said, then hesitated. "And I made you something." He walked over and handed her the paper. It was a drawing done in crayon, stick figures, Caroline in the middle with her big silver hair and a wide smile. Ethan and Lily stood on either side of her holding hands. Above them were words misspelled but clear. "You are my hero." Caroline stared at the picture, her throat tightening. She looked at Ethan, who stood waiting with uncertain eyes. "Did you draw this tonight?" He nodded. "I just wanted you to know." She reached for him, pulled him close, and held him tighter than she had in days. "Thank you, baby," she whispered into his hair. "I needed that." He leaned into her hug, then turned to go back to bed. Caroline stayed seated for a long time, the picture in her lap. The bills were still on the table. The numbers hadn't changed, but something in her head. She may not have had enough money, enough rest, enough help, but she had never run out of love. A knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just familiar. Caroline paused mid-step in the hallway, a basket of clean laundry balanced on her hip. The children were upstairs, giggling over something in Lily's room. Outside, the early evening sun painted the porch in golden light. It should have been an ordinary Tuesday, but the knock turned the air still. She set the basket down slowly. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. A quiet knowing rose in her chest, heavy and unwelcome. When she opened the door, there he was, David. The same pressed shirt, though slightly wrinkled now, the same deep-set eyes and slow smile. But something in his face had changed, a weariness around the mouth, a hesitation in the eyes. "Caroline," he said, almost like a question, She stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame. He cleared his throat. "Can I come in?" She didn't answer right away, didn't open the door wider, just looked at him for a long moment. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," he added, quieter. "I wasn't sure I should," she replied. David nodded, hands in his pockets. "That's fair." The silence stretched between them, thick with things left unsaid. He glanced down at the floorboards, then back at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "You disappeared, after I trusted you with the truth." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong. I got scared. I didn't know how to show up for something I didn't feel ready for. But I've been thinking about it, about you, about the kids, about what I walked away from." She crossed her arms. "You walked away from me." "I know," he said again, his voice low. "I was selfish. I thought I had time to figure it out. But I've been sitting with it, and I just wanted to see you, to say sorry, and to ask if maybe you'd let me try again." Caroline leaned against the doorframe, her arms still folded. "I waited for your love when I was most alone," she said softly, "and you weren't there." David looked down again, ashamed. "I wish I'd handled it differently. I let fear make my decisions." "I don't need perfect, David," she said, "but I need steady. I need someone who doesn't walk out the minute life looks a little complicated." He looked up at her then, and there was a real emotion in his face. Regret. Maybe even sorrow. "I've missed you," he said. "I still care. I'm not asking for everything right now, just the chance to be here, however you'll let me." Caroline glanced back towards the stairs. She could still hear Lily's voice floating down, light, innocent, safe. Her hand rested on the door. She thought about the empty nights, the unanswered calls, the weeks of silence and the weight of single motherhood. She thought about Ethan's drawing, Margaret's porch, the voice inside her that had gotten a little louder every day. She looked back at David. "I'm not the same woman you left behind," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe that's a good thing." She stood in the doorway a moment longer, then nodded once. "I need time," she said. "I can wait." But this time, she didn't invite him in. Not yet. "I waited for your love when I was most alone, and you weren't there." Caroline's voice was calm, not angry, not trembling, just true. They sat across from each other in the living room. The children were upstairs, the low sound of their laughter floating down like a reminder of everything that mattered most. David sat forward, hands clasped between his knees, his eyes never leaving hers. He had come back the following week, gentler, quieter, unsure but persistent. He brought groceries, fixed the front steps without being asked, told Ethan he liked his new haircut. Lily still hid behind Caroline's legs when he spoke, but she peeked out more often now. He was trying. But trying wasn't the same as showing up the first time. Now, here they were, the conversation neither of them could avoid. "I thought I could earn your trust again," David said softly. Caroline leaned back into the couch cushions, folding her hands in her lap. "I don't hate you," she said. "I don't even feel bitter. But I did a lot of grieving after you left, not just for you, for the part of me that still believed someone would stay." David looked down, ashamed. "I failed you," he said. "You did," she answered. "But the truth is, it wasn't just about me. You left those children too. You never even gave them a chance." "I was afraid," he whispered. "And I was tired, grieving, raising 2 children who had already lost too much. And I still stayed," Caroline said. "That's the difference between us." He nodded slowly. "I still care for you," he said. That hasn't changed. Caroline gave him a sad smile. I know, but caring isn't enough. She stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly to watch Ethan ride his bike up and down the sidewalk. Lily sat on the porch step with a coloring book, humming softly to herself. I've worked too hard to rebuild this life, she said, to bring peace into this home, to carry these children through the worst and still find joy in their laughter. David stood too, uncertain. I would never hurt you again, he said. But you already did, she replied, turning to face him. And whether or not you meant to doesn't undo what I had to survive without you. He was quiet then. Caroline stepped closer, not angry, just steady. You're not a bad man, David, but you're not the man I need, not anymore. The words didn't sting like she thought they would. They tasted like freedom. David reached for his coat slowly. Then I won't ask again, he said, but thank you for hearing me out. She walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, he paused. You really are stronger than when I met you. Caroline nodded once. I had to be. Then she closed the door behind him, not with regret, not with resentment, with peace. Love doesn't always save us. Sometimes it betrays us to set us free. Caroline stood in the middle of her kitchen, apron dusted with flour, cornbread in the oven, and laughter echoing from the backyard. It was a Saturday afternoon, nothing special on the calendar, but her home felt like celebration. Margaret sat at the kitchen table peeling sweet potatoes, swaying slightly to the gospel playing low from the radio. Ethan was outside, racing the neighbor's boy down the sidewalk, and Lily was in the den, humming as she carefully laid the table with her grandmother's best dishes. No reason, just because it feels fancy. There was no man beside Caroline, no arms wrapped around her waist. And yet, she had never felt more held. The house smelled of cinnamon and something warm, and as Caroline stirred the greens on the stove, she felt a stillness that came not from lack, but from fullness. It hadn't come easy. It had come through heartbreak, hard choices, and the kind of strength that doesn't shout but endures. Margaret glanced up at her. You look lighter, she said. Caroline smiled. I feel lighter. You miss him. Caroline thought for a moment. No, I miss the version of myself that thought I needed him. Margaret gave a knowing nod and returned to her peeling. Takes a woman a long time to see her own worth without a mirror. I had mirrors, Caroline said softly. They're upstairs sleeping in superhero pajamas. That night, after dinner was eaten and dishes were washed, the kids piled onto the couch with her to watch a movie. Ethan fell asleep first, his head on her shoulder. Lily curled up under Caroline's arm, a thumb in her mouth, her curls tucked into her grandmother's side. Caroline looked down at them, at the softness in their faces, the complete trust, the joy they had taught her to carry again. She wasn't just raising them. They were raising something in her too. She was no longer surviving. She was living. And not because someone had chosen her, but because she had finally chosen herself. She pressed a kiss to Ethan's forehead, then to Lily's. Outside, the streetlights hummed. Inside, the house glowed with warmth and something stronger than any promise David could have made. Home. Not just a place, a decision, a declaration. They were enough. The porch was still. Caroline rocked gently in her chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her as the evening sun sank behind the trees. A breeze rustled the tall grass along the fence. Ethan and Lily played just out of sight, chasing each other with plastic swords and wild laughter, their joy stretching far into the golden hour. She held a warm cup of tea in both hands, the rim worn from years of use. It wasn't the finest cup, but it was hers, like most things in this house now. Worn, steady, and still standing. She looked out at the yard, then up at the sky, and breathed. There was no music, no applause, no dramatic ending, just peace. Peace earned in full. She had loved and lost, trusted and been betrayed, wept in the silence of her own kitchen. And still, she had risen. Not because she was unbreakable, but because she learned to gather every shattered part of herself and keep going anyway. There was no shame in wanting love, no weakness in hoping for it again. But she had learned that the deepest kind of love, the kind that endures, is the kind you build from the ground up, the kind you pass on, the kind you leave behind not as words, but as proof. Lily's soft voice rang out from the yard. "Grandma, look at me." Caroline smiled. "I see you, baby." And she did. She saw them both, these children entrusted to her care, these living legacies of the daughter she lost and the strength she never knew she had. They were joy and noise and interruption. They were purpose. They were love. She turned her gaze back towards the sky. "If anyone's listening," she murmured, "just know I didn't let it break me." Then, as if to the reader, someone unseen but present, she added steady and clear, "Betrayal can break you, or it can build you. I chose to rise." And with that, Caroline leaned back in her chair, wrapped in the quiet pride of a woman who survived everything they said she couldn't. If you've ever been left, overlooked, or underestimated, if you've had to start over when you were already tired, if you've raised others while rebuilding yourself, this story was for you. And if you found strength somewhere along the way, tell it, share it, pass it on, because someone else might need it next.